Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the second day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Today I'm going to have what may sound as a strange presentation, a strange message, but bear with me. The title of today's message is King Hezekiah and the Feast of Tabernacles. But King Hezekiah, what's he got to do? Well, that's why I said bear with me. Because what the story will tell, what we're going to do is we're going to begin with an ancient prophecy. And we will go into perhaps what we would call, for lack of a better word, a model, and then conclude with another ancient prophecy. How maybe we tie this all together. Give us a working model, if you will, of the story of Hezekiah. So we're going to start with one very brief verse out of the book of Joel, Joel 2, if you'll open up with me there. And we're going to come back to Joel. But we're right now. Joel, chapter 2, verse 20. But I will remove it far from you, the northern army. Now, it doesn't say necessarily that. Now, the word army, at least in my translation, is in italics. So could this mean northern army or northern king? We're going to see here after a bit. It could go either way, actually. I will drive them away into a barren, desolate. Have a brave volunteer braving my reading glasses. Oh, never mind, I got them right here. Hey, I can see it now. I will drive him away into a barren and desolate land with his face toward the eastern sea. Boy, I can see better now. And his back toward the western sea. His tents will come up, and his foul odor will rise because he has done monstrous or blasphemous things. Now we're going to tie this up with another one here after a bit. Now turn with me, if you will. I'll kind of give us a working model here. Turn with me to 2 Chronicles 32. There's a parallel account in 2 Kings 18. Oh, that's a parallel account, but we're going to read out the one in 2 Chronicles 32. That's the one we're going to read out of. But there is a parallel account in 2 Kings 18. I'll pass it out on for what it's worth. We're 2 Chronicles chapter 32. We're going to start from the top. After these deeds of faithfulness. Did I hear a comment? Okay, after these deeds of faithfulness, that is reference to King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and he entered Judah, and he encamped against the fortified cities, thinking to win them over to himself. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come, and that his purpose was to make war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his leaders and his commanders to stop the water from the springs which are outside the city, and they helped him. Many of the people gathered together who stopped all the springs and the brook which that ran through the land, saying, well, why should the king of Assyria come and find much water? Simple, that they didn't want to have any water supply for the king of Assyria. That was simple. Now they wanted to make sure he didn't have any water. After all, when you got an invading army, you don't want to leave them for an abundant supply of fresh water now, do we? Make him get his own water for his own horses, right? Kept the water supply within Jerusalem. And he strengthened himself. And he built up the wall that was broken. And he raised it up to the towers. He built another wall outside. And he prepared a mile in the city of David. And made weapons and shields in abundance. So it's working overtime, making some weapons for war. And he met the military captains over the people. And gathered them together in the open square of the city gate. And And he gave them encouragement and said, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid of dismay before this king of Assyria, nor all the multitude that is with him, or nor before all the multitude that is with him. For there are more of us than with him." I'm thinking we've heard this before. Who would that be? We're going to find out. "And with him there is an arm of flesh, but with us is the help of Yahweh our Elohim, to help us and to fight our battles." The people were strengthened by the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. Now after this, verse 9, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, sent his servants to Jerusalem. They still had all, but he and all the forces with him laid siege against Lachish. Sent King Hezekiah to all of Judah who were in Jerusalem, saying, "Thus says Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and what do you trust that you remain under siege in Jerusalem? Does not Hezekiah persuade you to give yourselves over to die by the famine and by the thirst, saying, 'Well, Yahweh will deliver us from the hand of the king of Assyria'?" Really? What? His words? "Has not this same Hezekiah taken away his high places and his altars, commanded Judah and Jerusalem, saying, 'You shall worship before the altar and will burn incense on it'?" When Hezekiah took his high places down, whose high places were they? Anybody? Take a guess?
Yes.
The what?
Yes.
Yes, David. They were the various
Asherah.
the various Asherah. Yes, Johannes, you're correct. All the various Asherah. So it wasn't Yahweh's high places he had torn down. He continues, Sennacherib, that's in verse 13. "Do you not know that what I and my fathers have done to all the peoples of the other lands? Well, were the gods of their nations of those lands in any way able to deliver their lands out of my hand? Who was there amongst all the gods of the nations that my fathers utterly destroyed and could deliver his people from my hand? And that your Elohim should be able to deliver you from my hand. Now therefore, don't let Hezekiah deceive you or persuade you like this. And don't believe him. For no God of any nation or kingdom was able to deliver his people from my hand or the hand of my father. Now how much less will your mighty one deliver you from my hand?" Well, he's really laying it on thick. He's talking smack, isn't he? As we hear in sports talk these days, right? You know how guys come onto a court or playing field, they start talking to each other? I see a few heads gone up and down. Oh yeah. Been there and done that, right? Furthermore, whosoever spoke against Yahweh and against his servant Hezekiah. But now he has a chorus kind of joining in on it with it. He also wrote letters to revile Yahweh of Israel and speak against him, saying, "As the gods of other nations have not delivered their people from my hand, so the mighty one of Hezekiah will not deliver his people from my hand." They called out with a loud voice in Hebrew to the people of Jerusalem. They were listening to the Hebrew. They were making sure they understood what they said. They weren't talking in a foreign tongue. They called out with a loud voice in Hebrew to the people of Jerusalem who were on the wall, to frighten them and trouble them, that they might take the city. And they spoke against the mighty one of Jerusalem, with the Elohim of Jerusalem, as against the gods of the people of the earth, the work of man's hands. Verse 20. Now because of this, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, prayed, and they cried out to heaven. And Yahweh sent an angel. Okay. Got a working model here going into effect. Let's pause here a moment. Let's keep going. I'm going to come back. Then as heaven sent an angel, they cried out. Then Yahweh sent an angel who cut down every mighty man of valor, leader, captain, in the camp of the king of Assyria. So he returned shamefaced to his own land. When he had gone to the temple of his own God, some of those who his own offspring struck him down with a sword there. He was killed off by his own sons. In the parallel account, these sons are named, they run away, and the youngest one takes the throne in his place. Thus Yahweh, saves Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and from the hand of all the others, and guided them on every side. So it doesn't say Hezekiah saved them. Yahweh saved them. He saved Jerusalem. Through an act of faith, Hezekiah and his men exercising Yahweh. That men had anything to do with it. And many brought gifts to Yahweh at Jerusalem and presents to King Hezekiah of Judah, so that he was exalted in the sight of all the nations thereafter. Now, what has a story like this got to do with the Feast of Tabernacles? Can we help tie this all together with the Feast of Tabernacles? I think we can. Hold your place here. Let's go back to Joel now. Let's go back to Joel 2, where we started. Maybe we can tie some of this together. Let's take it right back up. This time we're going to back up a little bit. We're going to back up a little bit to verse 18. Then Yahweh will be zealous for his land and pity for his people. Didn't we just read that in the account of Hezekiah? And Yahweh will answer and say to his people, behold, I will send you grain and new wine, and all of you will be satisfied by them. I will no longer make you reproach my thinking. But I will remove from you who? Northern army, or the northern king, if you will. And I will drive him into a barren and desolate land, with his face toward the eastern sea and his back toward the western sea. His stench will come up, and his foul odor will rise, because he has done his monstrous things. What monstrous things did he do? Well, we read of his own talk. His own words condemned. Now what I'm proposing here, this is not exactly a prophecy with Hezekiah's story as account, because we need to remember one thing. Which came first, the account of Hezekiah or this prophecy? This account. But the parallels of the prophecies of future events parallel this greatly. Let's keep going. Because we've got to remember one thing with types. There are several things that we would do well to remember with concerning types. But what's the number one thing we need to remember concerning types?
Everything typifies Joshua.
They typify, maybe not Joshua so much, Daniel, but you're correct. They point to somebody or something else greater than them. Yes. What else? No, they don't reign. They are inherently imperfect. All types, to one extent or another, are inherently imperfect. Now, why are they imperfect? I hear what? They're flesh. Thank you, Daniel. Yes. They're flesh. They're human. They're pointing to something greater than they are. It's a prototype or a model, if you will. It is a prototype. Again, a prototype or a model. Because if it were perfect, it wouldn't be a type, would it? Let's keep going in Joel. I'll I'll remove from you the northern army. Okay. Verse 20. Well, he drove away the northern army. The parallel account gives us a number of 185,000. Actually goes a bit more detail on some of Hezekiah, of Sennacherib's bragging. Oh, here, you don't have any horses and chariots? Here, I got them for you. Here, if you think you can field them, if you think you got enough men to field them, here, come out and fight. But he didn't continue in Joel. Fear not, O land, be glad and rejoice, for Yahweh has done marvelous things. Do not be afraid of the beast of the field. Well, in a lot of his bragging and trash talk, was he not hollering and bellowing as Sennacherib like a strange beast? Just like some common beast? He wasn't literally a beast, but figuratively speaking, yes, he was. For the pastures are springing up, and all the trees bear its fruit, and the fig tree and the vines bear their strength. Were gifts not brought to both Jerusalem and to Hezekiah, following the defeat of Sennacherib? What usual gifts would have been? I mean, we just read of here, these figs, these vines, by their strength. A lot of these, they all associated with it. That would have been kind of pricey, wouldn't it? Pricey stuff. The good stuff. They didn't bring the cheap stuff. They didn't go to Walmart and get this oil from Walmart, did they, to bring to a king or to Yahweh? No. No, they brought the good stuff. Verse 23. Be glad then, you children of Zion, and rejoice in Yahweh your Elohim. For he has given the former rain faithfully, and he will cause the rain to come down for you, the former rain and the latter rain in the first month. The threshing floors will be full of wheat, and the vats shall overflow with new wine and oil. So I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, and the crawling locust, and the consuming locust, and the chewing locust. Where's that? My great army which I sent among you. So it wasn't Hezekiah. I don't remember reading that it was the army set out by Hezekiah and his commanders. You flank this guy here, you flank this guy over here, and we'll punch him right up the gut, right? No, that didn't happen. This is Yahweh speaking. He said, in my army which I send among you, you shall eat plenty and be satisfied and praise, and you shall praise the name of Yahweh, who has done wondrously with you. Well, what did they do when they were after the defeat of Sennacherib? My people shall never be put to shame. You shall never know, and you shall know that I am in the midst of Israel. I am Yahweh your Elohim. There is none other. My people shall never again be put to shame. Again, this didn't exactly happen. I mean, at least not in Hezekiah's lifetime. That did not happen. Now, were they put to shame for their own sins and other kings after them? Yeah, but that was... Now, let's turn to Zechariah 14. Pick it up in verse 3. Yahweh will fight against those nations as he fights in a day of battle. Now, you've got to remember one thing about this prophecy in Zechariah. This, before we go any further, this prophecy too was given well after the fact. Well after the days of Hezekiah. This was actually given during the days of Nehemiah, during the rebuilding of the temple. And Yahweh will go forth and fight against those nations, as he fights in the day of battle. And that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and as The Mount of Olives shall also be split in two, from east to west, making a very large valley, and half of the mountain shall be moved toward the south, and toward the north, and half of it moved toward the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley, and the mountain valley shall reach to us all, and you shall flee, yes, as you fled from the earthquake in the days, fled from the earthquake in the days of King Uzziah of Judah. And thus says Yahweh my Elohim, you will come, and all the saints with you. Verse 6, it will come to pass in that day that there will be no light. The lights will diminish. Where else do we read of lights diminishing?
Matthew 24.
Matthew 24. Thank you, Matthew 24.
Joel 2. Joel 2.
Joel, imagine that, David, Joel 2. We read of that in Joel 2, Matthew 24. We read of that in Luke 21. Shall be one day, which is known to Yahweh, neither day or night, but at evening it shall happen that it will be light. The day which is known to Yahweh. What did Joshua say about this day that's just been described here?
No man knows the day.
No man, thank you, David. Yes, no man knows the day other than the Father. No, only the Father knows this day. They asked him that question a couple times. Once while they were Joshua and the disciples, in Matthew 24. Asked him about the sign of the end, and coming one of the things he said is that no man knows the time of coming, but only the Father. They asked him again in Acts 1, after his resurrection. He gives them a very similar answer. It is not given to you to know the day or the hour, but my Father only. And even if it had been given to Joshua, Joshua did not share it with them. People still wonder about that, but as it stands, it's easier to believe still only the Father knows. It shall be one day which is known to Yahweh, neither day nor night, but at the evening time it will happen, and that it will be light. And that day, it shall be that living water shall flow from Jerusalem toward the eastern sea, half from toward the western sea. In both summer and winter it shall occur, that Yahweh shall be king over all the earth. And that day it shall be, Yahweh is one, and Yahweh is one, and his name is one. And all the land shall be turned into a plain, from Gabal and Ramon, south of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be raised up and inhabited in her place, from Benjamin's gate to the place of the first gate in the corner gate, and from the tower of Hanel to the king's wine press. Verse 10 is kind of interesting. So, what did we read of? What did we read of in 2 Chronicles? What did we read in 2 Chronicles? Seem to recall at the close of this story, verse 23, and many brought gifts to Yahweh at Jerusalem and presents to King Hezekiah, so that he was exalted in sight of all the nations thereafter. It's a nice parallel to the close of that story, isn't it? At least that part of the story. Continuing on in Joel. Because what follows here in Second Chronicles, we'll pick up on that in a moment. The threshing floors shall be full of wheat, and the vat shall overflow with new wine and new oil, just like they brought the gifts. And all Hezekiah and Jerusalem were all lifted up in the sight of the nation. Power sorts of the years of the swarm of the yeah, here we go. I'll also place momentarily. So, how did this story end? Okay, keep your place, but let's go back to Second Chronicles, please, 32. But there's still some similarities here. Pick out in verse 24. Or, excuse me, verse 27. 2 Chronicles 32. 32:27, yes. Hezekiah had very great riches and honor, and he made himself treasuries for silver, gold, precious stones, spices, shields, for all kinds of desirable items, storehouses for the harvest of grain, wine, oil, and salt, for all kinds of livestock and folds. Sounds like all the stuff the people brought him, didn't it? Sounds like all the stuff that Joseph spoke of, didn't it? Moreover, the cities provided for themselves possessions of flocks and herds in abundance, for Yahweh had given them very much property. For the same Hezekiah also stopped up the water by the upper Gihon, brought water by the tunnel by the west side of the city and to the city of David. However, regarding the ambassadors of the princes of Babylon, whom they sent to him to inquire about, wonder what was done in the land, Elohim withdrew from him in order to test it, that he might know all that was in his heart. Well, what exactly could that have been? Let's read about this test. Let's read about this test in Isaiah 39. We're going to read about this. Turn with me to Isaiah 39. Pages together. Isaiah 39. Verse 1. At that time, Baladan, the son of Baladan, the king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick of what he'd been sick of. That's back in 2 Chronicles 32 on how Yahweh chose to test him, to test all that was in his heart. The prophet comes to see him, tells him he needs to be healed. And Hezekiah was pleased with them. As the ambassador from Babylon, and continuing at Isaiah 39. Hezekiah was pleased with them. And he showed them the house of all his treasures, silver, gold, spices, the precious ointment, all his armory, and all that was found amongst his treasures. So he showed them everything that had been brought. There was nothing in his house or all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Hezekiah the prophet went to the king and said to him, well, what do these men say? And from where did they come to you? Hezekiah said, oh, they sent me from a far country, from Babylon. Weren't they warned in Deuteronomy 32 about nasty neighbors from a far country? Hezekiah, and he said, verse 4, so what have they seen in your house? And Hezekiah said, oh, they've seen all that is in my house, and there is nothing amongst my treasures that I have not shown them. So if he was good for it, he showed it to them. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of Yahweh of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house, what your fathers have accumulated until this day, shall be carried to Babylon, and nothing shall be left, said Yahweh. They shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, that you will beget, and they will become eunuchs in the place of the king of Babylon, or in the palace of the king of Babylon. Hezekiah said, well, the word of Yahweh which you have spoken is good. For he said, at least there will be peace and truth in my days. At least it's not going to happen to me. So how grateful really was Hezekiah? Not very. In spite of all his pleading, he was still none too grateful. How differently could this been had Hezekiah been grateful for some spirit of gratitude? Had he passed the test? Could have been quite different, couldn't it? I'm sure war at some point in time would have been imminent, because that's the way it is in this day and age. But instead of being told that he was going to, that he should see his sons carried off. Imagine, if you will, what if he'd been given to share the same promises as, say, David's son Solomon, when he was put to the test and he passed. Tell me, what was the results of at least Solomon's early time when he was given a little test and he passed? Riches, fame, wealth, honor, knowledge, wisdom, peace on all sides of his borders.
People coming to him and giving him homage.
People coming to him, giving him homage, bringing him presents instead of him paying tribute. They were paying him tribute, right? So all these kings, when all these kings brought all this wealth and honor to Solomon, one came with, shall we say, a nefarious motive. So what does this tell us about Hezekiah? He got caught up in the moment with all this wealth and honor. It went to his head, just like it did in the time of Solomon, didn't it?
Tried to show off.
Tried to show off. Instead, he remained caught up in the moment. Solomon, evidently, they were one of the last to come, because remember, what did it say? It said, the scripture said, it showed him the last, right? It showed him everything. Yes, David.
If we look at it, Hezekiah's, Yahweh's army protected them because Hezekiah was, true to Yahweh. Mm-hmm. But then his son after him, Manasseh, turned away from Yahweh. Yahweh removed that protection, and it allowed the Babylonian army to just take over.
And that was when they started having trouble with Babylon, yes. The first of the sons to start being hauled off, yeah.
Manasseh.
Was Manasseh. So what would this have to do with the Feast of Tabernacles? In a manner of speaking, so that, remember, this story is an imperfect sight of what could have been. He had peace. At least in his days, he had peace. He had rest. And what the word of Yahweh could have been. So let's think about this in a moment. When Yahweh does something great for us, We're in trouble. How do we apply that? What happens when we're in trouble? Let's take Hezekiah's problem and apply it to our own, to ourselves. Don't look around the room looking at other people. Look at the man in your own there. Look, when we find ourselves in various troubles. Now, I don't think we're going to be surrounded by this Syrian army. I don't see that anytime soon. But what? Maybe an army, but what if we do find ourselves in some kind of trouble? We cry. Are we going to go grab our gun, or are we going to call out to Yahweh? We'll grab him. No, we're going to call out to Yahweh. Okay? Yahweh answers our prayer. He hears us. Here's where the test is sometimes. Sometimes Yahweh may pull it away from us a little bit after something like this. Why is this? We've been told already in the scripture. So for the testing, very good. You are listening. Very good. I like hearing that. To allow for the test. So when our proverbial northern army is removed, it's great to get caught up in a moment, to be happy, to celebrate. Be happy for the good things that Yahweh brought to us, correct? But we should always remember to be grateful, because we can always fall into that trap of what? I did this, I did that. We can fall from grace and become like Sennacherib. Remember, what did he say? I did this, I. What I'm going to do. Come on, boy. This is what I'm going to do to you too. There's more detail of that's written in the parallel account of 2 Kings 18. And tell me, I'm trying to think, where does this attitude come from? This I, what I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I did this, I did. Where does that come from? Satan.
Yes.
Yes, very good. Because we read of this, don't we? We do read of this. We read of this in Ezekiel 28. We read of this attitude in Ezekiel 28. Let's pick this up in verse 11. Now, moreover, the word of Yahweh came to me. He said, Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre. Now, in this passage here, Ezekiel 28, we notice at the top we got the word prince in verse 2. So it say, Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre. And in verse 12, we got, say to the king of Tyre. Now in verse 12, the word for king is Melech. I've forgotten what the word for prince was. I looked at it and I thought, I'll remember that. Guess what? I didn't either remember it. But in any case, both the English and the Hebrew agree. They capture each other well, because one conveys a lower power like the prince, one's a higher power like the king, correct? Well, the English and the Hebrew capture this. We can do continuing in verse 12, Ezekiel 28. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Hezekiah was a good guy in the beginning. Now, he wasn't full of wisdom, and he wasn't a perfection of beauty, but he was at least a good guy at the beginning of this story, right? You were in Eden, in the Garden of Eden. Well, Hezekiah wasn't exactly there, but in any case, every precious stone was your covering: the sardius, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the sapphire, the turquoise, the emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you from the day you were created. You were the anointed cherub who covered, and I established you. And you were on the holy mountain of Elohim, and you walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. You were perfect in all your ways from the day you were created until iniquity was found in you. Just like in Hezekiah. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of Elohim. I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Verse 17. Here we come with the I attitude right here. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Hezekiah was not grateful for the deliverance of Yahweh. He flunked the test, didn't he? He didn't do so well. I cast you to the ground, I laid you before kings. What was supposed to happen to Hezekiah's sons? They weren't going to be exalted above the rest of the kings. They're going to be brought down below them, that they might gaze at you. Or say, you defiled your sanctuary by the multitude of your iniquities. By the iniquity of your trading. Therefore you also your midst, I devoured you. The ashes upon the earth, the son of all who saw you. And let's listen, thought. Let's get to the heart of the matter, of this matter, actually, because what we're going to find, actually. Isaiah 14, you're correct, David. Verse 13, this is where the eye really comes in. For you, Isaiah 14, verse 13. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, and I will exalt my throne above the stars of Elohim, and I will also sit on the mountain of the congregation, and I will sit on the further side of the north, and I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High. And isn't that what Sennacherib sounded like in all his boasting? That's exactly what Sennacherib said. What he was going to do. It wasn't. He may not have repeated. He didn't repeat these exact words, but the attitude's all the same. We talked about what he was going to do in Jerusalem. Well, he was going to. His idea was to take Jerusalem, temple, and everything. That same I attitude. Instead, what if Hezekiah had displayed the proper attitude? Could have literally been in heaven. Could have had another raising up of the kingdom, boom, just like we saw in the days of Solomon. I want to read briefly another little excerpt from 2 Chronicles 32. We were in those days, verse 24, Hezekiah was sick, and near death he prayed to Yahweh and gave him assignment. Hezekiah did not repay according to the favor shown him. For what his heart was lifted up. Like whose? Like what we just read? And his wrath was looming over him and over Jerusalem.
Where are you, Curtis?
I'm in 2 Chronicles 32, 25. I just finished 25. Then Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. But the wrath of Yahweh did not come upon him in the days of Hezekiah. Now, it spared him and his generation, but if it didn't, why would this be allowed in the days? Why would Yahweh continue let this be dropped on his sons? This curse be dropped. One, his sons would be Well, what were his sons behind him like, correct? That was one thing. Maybe his humbling himself was not sufficient for, I don't know. We really can't say. Any question or comment? Anybody? Don't be afraid. David?
No, I was just gonna say, you asked the question, you know, what if he would have passed the test? What if he would have, you know, actually been more honorable as opposed to boastful about what he had? We possibly would not have the 70 years in Babylon. Possibly would have had, you know, Yahweh's protection across Israel for a lot longer time. Potentially would not have had the worst king in the history of Judah and Manasseh.
Yeah, as his son, was the worst king.
And the longest reigning king.
And the
so a lot of what ifs, a lot of things could have happened differently. But that goes to us and our walk and our passing of each test. We can make it better in our lives if we pass the test and we see the promise, or we can make it worse on our lives if we fail the test and succumb to the curses. And it's all about the blessings and the curses.
Also, in 26, did it not say not only did Hezekiah get prideful, did it also say in his heart, also the people too?
Yes,
Yeah.
they joined in.
So that made it even worse.
That made it even worse. They joined in. That's right. You're correct. You did pick up on that.
Goes back to Bob's sermon earlier. The king, which is set up, is setting the example for all of his followers. And if the example is bad, the people are going to be bad.
Right. And given a reference to that,
Bad king, bad people.
what was the king of Nineveh?
Yes.
In Jonah?
Yes.
The king actually got the people, because they knew of Yahweh, to turn back from their ways and actually honor Yahweh, to change the life of the people, because he was the king over the people followed him. So just the same way the people followed Hezekiah, they got prideful. The leader, the influence the leader has
Isn't
over
that
the
interesting?
people. Yeah.
Yeah, when in case y'all didn't hear, it was brought up. It had in the story of Jonah, the account of Jonah. And he went to see the king of Assyria, and when he heard the message of Jonah, he and all the people, they followed the king's lead, repented of all their evil ways. They became less proudful, boastful, a little less warlike, and that, at least for the days of that king, correct?
And
That generation.
those people were brutal.
And those people were brutal.
They talk about how brutal they were. They were war.
I mean, their wars. Sennacherib, bragged about it. He bragged about it all. You get a good dose of that in the words of Sennacherib. They turned from every bit of that. Yet we see the opposite effect with Hezekiah. A great victory, a great deliverance, and they get proud of themselves in a hurry, don't they?
It's almost like people take Yahweh's protection for granted, which you should never do.
Which should never take Yahweh's protection for granted. Anyone else? So we got two different kings of what? We got the king of Assyria, one under Jonah. We got the one Sennacherib in the days of Hezekiah. And as Hezekiah's life was extended, he got an extension of his life from his illness. But what's the greatest deliverance we have to look forward to in our? What are we looking forward to mostly? Eternal life. We're looking to gain the kingship that Hezekiah and his sons lost, right? It's going to be eternal. Because following that, the days of Hezekiah, we had king and priest. Really start to mess things all up, didn't they? I won't go into the details. You can read it out yourself. But yeah, in this future, as what the Feast of Tabernacles points to, as those who receive actually eternal life, we receive what Hezekiah took for granted, didn't he? So while we haven't received it yet, let's be grateful. Have a great, humble attitude. Be grateful for what Yahweh has given us so far. Because as I stand right now, I'm just a country boy life brought to the city, okay? I'm not worthy of anyone's worship. What I hope to attain in one day, and the rest of y'all, would be, won't it? Become those royal priests. Hezekiah had the world in his hand. But Yahweh's deliverance as his. But he took it all for granted and lost it. So let's focus on the goal. Pay attention to ourselves. Take care of the log in our own eye, correct?
That's right.
And we will receive much greater than what Hezekiah took for granted. If there's no more question or comment, we'll close. We'll have a closing song and prayer.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.